Okay. So, one general point we can make about these myths, and we see this on page 161, is that Beauvoir says in most of the stories we have in our culture, it's men who are at the center of the stories. And this is true of history, which is people actually doing things, but also the stories that we make up. It's always a man at the center of it. Not always, but usually. Now, why is this? It's because, as she says, we think of woman as, quote, the complement and the inessential to man, man being the essential, and that's why he's at the heart of every story. Okay? We think of men, she says, quote, that the presence of men in the world is an inevitable fact and a right, but the presence of women in the world is an accident, a fortunate accident, but an accident nonetheless. So one way you can test this, oh, and quick note, Beauvoir thinks our whole culture does this. Men and women both. Okay, so please don't feel like she's mad at you if you're a guy, or that she's blaming men, or that she's mad at male authors for creating this myth. No. No person and no gender, not men, nobody is responsible for this directly. It's what we absorb by being in our culture. So if these ideas make sense to you, if she points to the myths and you go, yeah, that's how it is, she's not mad at you, she's not calling you sexist, she's just saying, yeah, our whole culture's absorbed these ideas that basically say women are less free and then ask women to be less free, right? We demand that men rise up to the level of freedom, and of course men do. Good for them. And we don't put that demand quite so strongly on women, so of course they don't rise up to the demand quite as often, because they're not asked to. It's not really like men did that to them. It's our culture perpetuates this. Okay, again. So, one of the ways you can test this is to think of the stories you know, and either try to swap a woman for the male lead. So, take your story and basically reverse all the genders. How about you do that? All the men become women, all the women become men. Does anything now seem strange to you about that story? Now, I have sort of two follow-ups to this thought experiment. One is, if nothing seems strange about it, why do you think it doesn't happen more often? That even today it's still usually men as the center of these stories. So at one level, I don't think there'd be anything strange about that. Okay, so, Apollo 13, it's all female NASA employees now and all female astronauts, and at home their husbands instead of their wives are worried about the safety of the mission. Yeah, nothing weird about that. So at one level there's nothing weird about it, and yet we don't see it happen. So then we flip the question again. If there's nothing strange to you about the fact that it's mostly men in these stories, then why is it not strange to you when it's not that way? Why don't we notice until it's pointed out to us that most characters are made for actors, for male actors. They're male characters. Whether it's literature, movie, TVs, all that. This is part of what Beauvoir says, is we know the world's half men and women. But when our cultural images are mostly men, it doesn't even shock us. We don't even notice. Why? Because part of us already accepts what the culture has told us, is that yes, women can be characters in movies, but of course they're not going to be characters in movies nearly as often. We don't even notice these things, right? Okay. And the technical terms here that Beauvoir uses, that we think of men as being essential, they're like fully real. The world has to have men in it for it to make sense. But if you sort of took all the women out, this is another thought experiment. Imagine the world we live in and just disappear all the women. Okay, and then give all the men amnesia. And then also give all the men somehow the ability to reproduce. Babies are born in test tubes or something. What would change about the world in your mindset? There'd still be sports, there'd still be politics, there'd still be literature, there'd still be art, there'd still be war, right? Nothing would change. Now do the same thing in your mind. Imagine if you disappear all the men, women forget that men ever existed, and babies are born in test tubes. Now do you think the world would be any different? And I don't know how you'd answer that question, right? Okay. So in fact, I was just thinking that as a thought experiment, a question to pose to you, but I'll put it in the discussion board and see what everyone has to say. Okay. Imagine the world and or the stories and movies either without women or without men or flipping the gender roles, and what, if anything, would change about how you view this story. Okay. One of the major themes, we see it beginning on 163, and it shows up almost all the way through 171 in our reading today, is that in stories and myths and art, woman is often associated with nature. Now, we all like nature. I like trees. I like the ocean. I'm sure you do too. But Beauvoir says, if you take a group of people and you consistently compare them to nature, and you say they are like nature or that they are closer to nature, if freedom is the ultimate human value, and you compare one group of humans to nature, nature is exactly what is not free. Only human beings are free. So if you compare a woman to a flower, she might be beautiful, but she's certainly not free. Right? Now, once more, there are plenty of examples of men being compared to nature throughout literature, art, and religious stories. But the bulk of the examples are of women being compared to nature. And we can jump ahead a little bit to, let's see, where is this section? It should be 174. Yeah, beginning on 174 and 177, we have nature again. And Beauvoir points out that we dress women in semi-natural objects, so we put feathers in their hair. I mean, women do this to themselves. They wear flowers. They wear perfumes that smell like flowers. They even wear jewelry that has natural stones on it. Now, I think the normal way we interpret this is we say, well, women are prized sexual objects of men. Men like to look, so they try to draw attention to themselves with these things. Fair enough. But Beauvoir says, but of all the things in the world that they draw attention to themselves with, they select these things which are closest to nature. Right? Now, why would that be? Right? And it says, because Beauvoir says, in women, what men want is they want a mixture of nature and humanity. Nature and culture. Now, why they want nature in women is precisely because natural objects are less free. That's what we expect out of women, and that's what we want out of women, is to be human, but also a little bit like a natural object. That is, a little bit like a stone in nature, a big old diamond in nature, that a man could just come by and pick up and take with him. A valuable object to be owned and consumed by a free human, that is, by a man. Now, I would expect in class a bunch of hands going up here and being like, oh, hell no, professor, right? I don't view myself that way as a woman, about half of you would say, and the other half men would say, I don't view women like that myself either. Good, good. But again, look at the symbols, and Beauvoir would say the symbols can't mean nothing. The symbols can't mean nothing, and even if some of them are traditional, you have to ask, what does the tradition symbolize? And if we're so against the traditional ways of women being less free, then why don't we give up the symbols that symbolize them as less free? So think about this. Think about people's names. At least in America, I don't know about other countries. Do you know any men who are named after natural objects? I can't think of any. Actually, once I knew one of my friends had a son and they named him Sequoia, which is a kind of tree. But women are named after natural objects all the time. Rose, Lynn. Lynn, it's a name for like a brook or a stream. Oh, what are some other examples? We call women my little turtle dove, right? Um, all these sorts of things. I'm not doing a great job generating the list here, but that's part of what I want you all to do. So it's just a symbol, right? It's just a symbol. But think about it this way. Women are compared to natural objects all the time, so much that we don't even notice that we're naming a human after an animal or after a plant. And as Beauvoir points out, it's asymmetrical. If someone compared you to a natural object, and you're a guy, I'm talking to the guys now, you probably wouldn't like it very much. If your parents named you after some pretty flower, guys, you'd probably be irritated. We're not irritated, though. We think it's cute or appropriate when women are named after natural objects, because Beauvoir says it's not just a symbol, it's not just a myth. It makes sense to us. So this is why in art all the time you see woman compared with the ocean, you see her compared with mountains, so they're, and you see her compared with plants, trees, forests, all these sorts of things. Okay. Now, like I said here, the problem with being compared with a rose for Beauvoir is not that roses are merely pretty. Okay? The problem with being compared with a rose is that roses are passive. We see this on page 163. She says, woman's fertility is considered to be a passive virtue. She is earth, which just lays there, and man is the seed, the active element. She's water, which is calm and still, and he's fire, this active principle. The still earth, which is toiled over by the laborer, receives the seeds, and so the generation is said to be by the activity of man, and not attributable to woman, because after all, she's merely natural, merely passive. Okay. So, beginning on page 165, we see, and again, these are symbols and myths and sort of repeated stories we have in our culture, and these come up to the contemporary day. And she says, guys are scared of childbirth. Guys are scared of women's periods. In fact, periods. If I just say the word periods, I would suspect about a quarter of the class is wincing and getting uncomfortable. Not all the men, but some of them, right? Maybe some of the women as well. They're like, why does he keep saying the word periods? Imagine if I was in class with you, I'd be making eye contact. It'd be very strange, right? You'd say, I don't like this class so much anymore. Now, why do periods make us men, but also people in general, so uncomfortable, Beauvoir says? She says it because women's bodies make men uncomfortable. Women's bodies in general make men uncomfortable. And here, if you've ever read Freud, Beauvoir has disagreements with Freud, but she thinks he's onto something, so you can imagine what you know about Freud here. Okay. Beauvoir says life and death are intertwined in sex, they're intertwined in childbirth, and they're intertwined in women's periods. Okay, we all know what a period is a symbol of. It's when a woman is fertile and she's reached childbearing age. We also know what it takes to make a child, sex. We also know what happens to that child. Here's where it gets very Freudian. Birth is nothing but death delayed. Everyone who's born is going to die. So, women's periods are a symbol of childbirth, which is itself not a symbol, but a partner, I guess you could say, of death. Women's childbirth and periods remind men of something about themselves that they don't really want to acknowledge. That they too have a body which is destined or sort of promised to have been born from other human beings who will one day die. Then you have to sort of do your animal duty and procreate yourself. Then you'll die. And then the children which you procreated will die. Like I said, this is heavy stuff. Now here's the thing is, that's just part of the human condition. At one level, you don't really probably have a problem with that. Yeah, it's the circle of life. No problem. On the other hand, you don't want to die. Surely you don't want to die. So Beauvoir says it's not the blood about periods that freaks guys out. Because guys don't get freaked out when their girlfriend, say, cuts herself if she stubs her toe really badly and it starts bleeding. Page 169, she says, yeah, the repulsion about periods is not about blood. Okay? You'll see guys who talk about fart jokes and all sorts of gross stuff day in, day out, who get totally freaked out by the mention of the word periods. And Beauvoir says, okay, what's behind that, right? It can't be natural because there'd be no reason for biologically the human species to be repulsed by the act of sex, which is necessary for the species. Biologically, being grossed out by periods makes about as much sense as being grossed out by food, right? Or like being attracted to predators. It wouldn't make much sense. So there's something culturally behind it. And it's that men don't want to acknowledge that their own body will get frail and die one day. Because who wants to think about that? So they sort of, again, it's all very psychoanalytic. They sort of project the fact that their body is weak and has this destiny that they never chose, a destiny to reproduce and make babies for the species. They project that onto women. Right? They don't want to have to acknowledge with the fact that that's true for all human beings, so they go, no, it's not me, it's them. They're like that. So an example I like to give here, and remember, I want your examples that support Beauvoir and your examples that don't support her. I want you supplying those in the discussion board. You can email me them, etc., nonstop, because your examples show better than mine often what I'm trying to show. And your counter examples make me think about, they make me reevaluate her and make sure that, I double check to see if she's as right as she seems to be. Okay, so supply me with those examples all you can. But here's my example. You see this in almost every movie where a character gives birth. The guy faints when he sees the baby being born. Now, seeing a baby being born, I bet that's intense. I've never seen it myself. But why would men faint and not women? Like a woman who's never had a child before, who's seen that, why didn't she faint? And why is it the father of the baby and not just guys in general? It's because he sees someone he used to have sex with and desire, his lover, now becoming a mother. And he sees someone he loves creating a child that, like him, was born without asking for it and will die without asking for it. So in the moment of childbirth, all the freedom of being a human being and all the unfreedom of being a human being is just manifest, symbolized in the childbirth, and you can't escape it. I mean, you'd have to be pretty dense, right, when a baby's being born to not think about what birth is. You'd have to be pretty dense to not eventually go from birth to death. Like I said, they're partners. Now, there's lots of other ways to read that, but that's the only way I've ever been able to come up with this repeated, almost cliche in movies. The guy always faints. Why would that be? Well, probably because symbolically it's overdetermined. It's sort of stuffed full with all these things about freedom, death, humanity, other people. Boom, all there in one act. We see at the bottom of 165 as well. Once more, this is probably culturally dependent, and yet it seems pretty common. if somebody talks about your parents having sex, you're probably a little bit grossed out, right? But if someone says something about your mother having sex, if you're a guy, do you probably want to sort of punch them in the face? Yeah, it probably gets you sort of angry, right? Now, if someone talked about your dad having sex, would you have that same protective, angry reaction? I would assume you wouldn't, right? So this is part of how Beauvoir would read something like that. We think of women in our culture as not that sexual. That is, we think of them as not actively wanting sex, but passively letting men have sex with them. That men actively want, with their freedom, they actively want sex, and that women don't actively want, with their freedom, sex. They just passively will let certain men have sex with them. So that's one aspect of it. You don't want to think of your mom having sex because it makes you imagine her as someone who desires to have sex. But we don't really attribute sexual desire to women. Again, biologically, that would be ridiculous, right? If only men wanted to have sex, or women just sort of sat there waiting to be impregnated, that would not be a great way to reproduce the species, right? Okay, another aspect of it is this, is we think of women as, what's the word I'm looking for? They're things in need of protection, and that men's job is to protect them. So we think if someone has sex with your mom, it feels like she was supposed to be protected and you failed. That's why guys get angry when you say these things about their mom, because they think you're saying you failed to protect your mom. But think about it, as a culture, if you've got one group of people who need protection and one group of people who have the power to protect them, you're saying that what your culture is or should be is that one group is empowered to do the protecting, and another group passively, again, it all comes back to passivity, passively needs someone stronger and more free to come around and take care of them. Final point, C, why men don't like people talking about their mothers having sex, is that your mom's the one who actually gave birth to you, not your dad. So when people talk about your mother having sex, it reminds you that you were born from that person. And then it brings up all this stuff about the fact that you'll be unfree one day when you die, because birth and death are twins. Now, is that, okay, once more, that is how Beauvoir would read that symbol. That's what's happening on pages 165 and 166. But you all might have a different way to read those symbols. You might have a different set of reason why men are defensive or angry about the idea of the women in their lives having sex. So if you do, surely share them with us in the discussion board. Okay, there's other ways to read these symbols for sure. So on page 171, we see this example of descriptions of the sexual act. Once more, we're going to see an asymmetry, so a lack of symmetry or a lack of equality, basically. And men will be described one way, and women will be described another way. Now, often how this is described in our cultures, we say, oh, they're complementary. You know, it's like day and night, light and dark, up and down. They're different, but they fit each other well. But this is what Beauvoir says about descriptions of the sexual act. The asymmetry is one that fits, sure, but it's one that fits where it's men being described as active, takers, doers, and possessors. And therefore, the fit is that women are the things taken, the things possessed. Basically, it's an asymmetry of sexual domination. So think about the ways we describe sex. And I don't want to get it. I guess we've already been in a lot of detail today, haven't we? Sorry if I made anyone uncomfortable. But when we say things, it's usually about a guy, whatever your chosen verb is for sex, having sex with the girl. Right? If you use the F word here, you'd say that he effed her. It'd be very rare to say that she effed him, probably. Okay? We think of men as taking virginity. We talk about conquering. We talk about deflowering, which is on page 174. And Beauvoir says on 174 going on to 175, there's all these symbols in sexual activity that basically men hunt for women, and that women are, again, natural objects, animals, desirable prey, she says, that men then go out and hunt and collect. They're compared to flowers that are plucked by men, fruits that are eaten by men. So an open pomegranate is a symbol of sexual sin. Maybe it's a symbol of original sin. I think it's a symbol of sexual sin in painting. Women are birds that are caught by men, etc. So, this again, the point is that there's an asymmetry, not equality, that it's always about freedom, and basically freedom is good. So if there's one side of a human interaction that's painted consistently as less free, that's not good for them. And that here it's nature which is used to symbolize this. Women are called birds and chicks, right? They're thought of as prizes to be collected by men. The point here for Beauvoir, just to be crystal clear, is not that, oh, men, that's not very nice. Don't think of women as sexual so much. Think of them as, full human persons. It's all about the activity. It's that men are seen to be on the hunt and women are seen to be there waiting for men to capture them. Okay? So in 175 we see when woman is symbolized as nature, she says, she's seen as, quote, the special object through which man subjugates nature. There's a metaphor about a cat that I won't go into, but you know how that's going to go. And 175 or 176, she says, the other, embodied in the image of the sea or the mountain, is the woman. Sea, mountain, and woman all provide man with the same passive and unexpected resistance, a challenge, basically, that allows the man to accomplish himself. They're a prey to be possessed. Okay? All the inner and passive qualities of an object. So here's something I want to say. We often use biology to describe this sexual relation. We say, well, men want to reproduce with as many women as possible. Women, though, want a more stable relationship, so they want to have sex with, I suppose, fewer men. And we start talking about cavemen going out and hunting, and men were all over the place hunting, so they were also looking for other women when they were outside of the cave, but women were in the cave, tending to the fire, so they couldn't go out and have sex with as many men. So men are naturally promiscuous and women are naturally more monogamous. Okay, first, general point, we told similar stories about this before we ever knew about evolution and cave people and any of this sort of stuff, right? So we already had other myths to explain why women are passive and let men have sex with them, let men deflower them, and why men are out there, all aggro, going out and collecting as many trophies as possible. So this is my point, is that it's not so much that the science validated what we already sort of knew. Beauvoir would say, once more, we're bending the science to justify what we already believed about women. Okay? And so we can see this, again, more examples on 177. She says, when we sexualize women, which let me repeat, she has no problem. She loved sex. She was in many relationships in her life. She's not anti-sex or anti-guy. But she says, when we sexualize women, what are our favorite parts to sexualize? And this varies culture to culture, but it's also pretty consistent culture to culture. Breasts and buttocks, she says. Now, once more, there seems to be a scientific reason for this. Breasts are where the milk comes out. Milk is what babies consume. Sex is about making babies, so men are sexually attracted to breasts. A few problems with this, though. First, you don't have sex with breasts, right? So clearly there's something more complicated going on here about the sexual desire for breasts. Men do not have sex with breasts, at least not reproductive sex. So it can't, it's maybe not quite that straightforward. Second, same thing. The buttocks are not something that makes milk for babies, right? But men throughout cultures are also very attracted to women's butts as well as their breasts. Once more, apologies if this isn't what you're expecting you'd get in an intro class. Sorry if I'm making you uncomfortable. Okay? Which is, so what do breasts and buttocks have in common? They're made of fat. Yes, the butt is the biggest muscle in the body, but it's also on women more so than men, the part of the body where a lot of their fat proportionally is stored. And of course, breasts are basically a nipple attached to fat. There's not much else there. So she says, this is her explanation. She says, breasts and buttocks are flesh given without purpose. So what we find sexually attractive about men is muscles. And what do muscles do? Muscles achieve freedom. So she says, virile beauty on page 176, that's masculine beauty, is the body's adaptation to active functions such as strength, agility, flexibility. It manifests transcendence, that is going beyond, and it animates the flesh. But she says, women's body doesn't radiate power out into the world. The common ways that we say women are beautiful or sexual. Okay? She says, women's body, when we're sexually attracted to it, doesn't promise anything but itself. It's a fatty proliferation that is not enlivened by any free project. It has no other meaning than to just be there. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, you may be thinking this. No, that's not what it's about. There's some other explanation. So again, she gives more examples that all point in the same direction. So why do we like women in high heels? I've heard people answer before, well, because it extends the leg. Okay, it does extend the leg. Why do we like extended legs on women? Do you want a girlfriend who's, 7'2"? She'd have very extended legs. So we do have answers in our culture. Heels extend the leg. But to me, that answer doesn't, it makes sense, but it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't actually say why. It just says what high heels do. Here's another thing that high heels do. High heels make a woman's body powerless. Beauvoir says on 177, she says, high heels, corsets, big old earrings, big old dresses, bound feet, all these things, complicated hairstyles, they, quote, increase the body's powerlessness. That is, they decrease a woman's freedom. So, I'll have you generate a list here in a second of things that our culture finds sexually attractive about men, and then things that we find sexually attractive about women. But Beauvoir is going to say, and she's given examples here of which body parts we like, things we have women wear, etc. Makeups, jewels, furs, flowers, stones, rings, jewelry, silk, all this stuff. Okay? She says, these things that we expect and want women to wear, and that women want to wear themselves, they're all things that decrease the woman's power. They constrict her, they make it harder to move, they make certain activities not appropriate for women. So women are more likely to wear silk shirts than men, right? Well, silk, if you sweat all over it, it doesn't look nice, it can ruin the silk, right? So that means that if women are wearing silky shirts, etc., they're not supposed to do things that might get them sweaty. That is, in Beauvoir's terms, they're supposed to limit their freedom so that they don't get sweaty. Right? And then look at what men wear. Men don't wear silk shirts usually. What are men wearing nowadays? Basketball shorts. Right? Complete range of motion. They're comfortable. They're up for anything. Except for, maybe a job interview. But they're ready to go. Big baggy clothing, comfortable, literally wearing athletic gear a lot of the time so that they could go anywhere, do anything at a moment's notice. But if a woman's in heels, or she's in a tight skirt, or she's in a dress of really any sort, or she has long hair, or she has big old earrings, or long fingernails, all these things that we commonly think are sexy on women. She's literally able to do less things, do fewer things. That is, her freedom is concretely constricted and limited by what she wears. Long fingernails make it hard to type, which is essential in today's world. Long hair means you can't work around certain machineries in the factory, etc., because your hair will get caught in the factory. It's very dangerous. Heels mean that you have to walk slowly, you may have to walk with your arm on someone, etc. Now, heels all by themselves might have an explanation. Oh, they make the leg look more muscular, that's sexy. Oh, they make the leg look longer, that's sexy. That is one possible explanation. But Beauvoir's gamble here is this, is that she's found a way to connect all these very different activities, what women wear, what we like about their bodies when they're not wearing anything, how they style their hair, the names we call them, rose, honey, right? All these sort of things. The metaphors we use for them, they're chicks, they're birds. All of these things cluster them as quasi-natural objects. And natural objects are always thought to be less free than human beings. So while there are some exceptions to this, there is also one sort of master key that can explain them all. And that is that woman is the other. We like it when women are slightly less free than men. We might say it's biological, but it's our preference as a culture. So two quick examples, further examples that Beauvoir gives to back this up. Okay. One is she says we privilege youth in women. We like young women. We think they're sexy. And older women, when they're all wrinkly and whatnot, sort of freak us out. Now you'll notice this in Hollywood. It's very rare for there to be an actress over about 40 years old. You could probably name them on one hand. Helen Mirren, Meryl Streep. Surely there's more, right? But I can't think of them. That's the point. Men over 40, there's Robert Redford, there's George Clooney. I don't know, Tom Cruise is probably getting up there, right? There's still roles for them. Anyways, she says we're sort of scared by older women. Once more, it sort of reminds us all that we're going to die. We want to pretend that's not going to happen. Now, you might say, no, we've been over this, Professor. There's a biological reason. Women are fertile, and when they're younger, maybe it sounds creepy, but guys like them because they want to reproduce with them. Okay. Women are not only fertile when they're 22 or something, which is for some guys, that's their sort of ideal age is 22. They're fertile all the way up to then 35 or so, 40, something like that, right? They're at least highly fertile all the way through their 20s into their early 30s, like up to their early 30s. After that, it can be a little harder to have kids. This is what Beauvoir says. She says, we're sexually attracted to youth in women because youth is identical with inexperience. Youth is almost identical to lack of power. So let's put it this way. Who is practically, concretely more free? Like who is more able to achieve the things they really want to achieve in their life? A 45-year-old or an 18-year-old? 45-year-old. Okay. Women who are older, we know, have more things figured out. They have more power. That is, they have more real freedom. Women having real freedom isn't a real turn-on for most guys. So for her, youth is not about, say, fertility. That's not why we, as a culture, are sexually attracted to young women. It's because their so-called innocence means that they're not active partners in the world yet. They're not responsible agents yet. That's why we like it. So if you get people's sort of ideal ages for men and women, for men it's much older. Because as a man grows older, he has more power, more money, has his life figured out, knows what he wants. That's human freedom in a nutshell. We're not exactly mad when women have those things. But like I said, it doesn't exactly turn guys on to think of a woman being an actual, exactly equally powerful partner. That's the appeal of youth, she says. And just one final example. This one goes very quickly. I just think it's sort of funny. She points out that women are much more likely to wear fur than men are. And if you can pull up in your head a stereotypical image of what a prostitute might wear, she might wear a leather skirt, or she might wear animal fur, right? Like animal prints, like a cheetah print skirt or something like that. So picture a guy wearing a cheetah print shirt or something like that. Okay. Men don't often do that. And why not? She says, because we think of women as being humans, of course, but humans who are sort of like animals. And men are not sexually attracted to animals, right? That's not what she's saying. But animal as symbol, leather as symbol of something that used to be natural that humans have translated into something more to their liking. That's sort of how we think of women. That they're out there. This is me adding this to Beauvoir. It isn't quite what she would say. That they're out there like prostitutes on a corner waiting for us. And that the guy will come by, like Richard Gere in Pretty Woman, and scoop her up, I mean. And that's why we associate animal prints with women, and especially with women in like a sexual mode, right? Like you're not going to wear your cheetah print skirt to church, right? Okay. Beauvoir says, what other possible explanation could that have? Why women wear animal print and leather, etc., a lot more than men do? When they do, there's a sort of sexual connotation to it. She says, because we as a culture think it's sexy when women play at being objects, when they play at being unfree. We don't want them to fully be natural objects. You can't love a stone. But men do find it very easy to love women who sometimes act a bit like a stone. That is, who sometimes let the man be fully in charge and let her be passive and inert like an object. So I'll just wrap this up. This will be the very last thing I say, I promise. Like I said, Beauvoir is not coming out here to yell at the men and say that they've enslaved the female, all the females, and that they're wicked. We all do this as a culture. Right? All the images we see. Pretty Woman the movie, to Disney movies, to advertisements, all this stuff. Back this up. So of course you do it. Beauvoir probably did it some, by accident. I probably do it some by accident. The point is not to blame anyone here. The point is just to reflect in your own life that some of these symbols that we all, men and women both, cherish imply that women are and should be less free than men. Imply that women are and should be sort of like objects and natural things, that is, they're for the activity of men. And if you see those symbols and think that's a legitimate way to read them, you probably don't want to do that anymore. You probably want to work away from that as much as you can. And that's really all she's asking, right? That's what she tried to do in her own life. That's sort of what she would expect the response would be. Okay, so that's today's reading. If you have examples of your own, counter examples of your own, or any questions about the many examples she gives, absolutely, as always, shoot me an email and we'll talk more. Okay, thank you, everyone.